Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be looking at my first pages in each of my comics, and I'm going to warn you about things to avoid and things to do. As you can see, I have made many comics. I have many comics on the go. I have been making comics since like 2012. It's been a minute. And I've had some successes. I've had mostly okay first pages, as you will see. But I'm going to go over all of them in publication order and tell you what works and what doesn't. Let's go. So, starting out, I have Sovereign. So this was our first comic. Now, this page I am looking at is a redraw of the first page, but it looked basically like this with crappier art. This was a redraw that I did for a video, honestly, like ages ago. And then when we went and reposted this comic, there was a whole hubbub. We lost our original comic site and we decided to just re-upload them elsewhere. So we just used the redone one because it looks better and it hooks readers sooner. And that's one of the saving graces of this page, is that it is a redraw. The art is better. It will bring more people in because my art looks nice in it as compared to my old art. And I know that is a fear that many comic creators have, is that the first page is very important. It is what will bring a reader in. There's a lot of talk and advice out there about like first pages. It's the same with like your first sentence, your opening paragraph in like a novel. Like your first page of your comic is important to bring people in, so you don't want a bad first page. And a common fear is that, well, when I first start making my comic and I make my first page, it's gonna look crappy and then my art gets better as I work on my comic. Like, what do I do with that? It's gonna scare people away because the art looks bad. So I will put that fear to rest a little bit, I hope, in that even if you have cruddy art at the start of your comic, the nice thing about webcomics is that as people find your comic and as you post more and your quality gets a lot better, people are willing to read through crappy art at the start of the comic to get to the better art where you are now. So don't let that fear stop you from making your comic. And you can always do what we do and redo the first page. My more practical advice, because I honestly don't want people going back and reworking their like first page or first chapter over and over again, because then you just get stuck in a cycle. Your art can always be better. It's best to just finish it and move on. So my more practical advice is that you should, when you start making your comic for the first time, start with like page 10. And then once you're feeling more confident in where your comic is, you go back to page 1. And then work on it. And it'll be better than if that was the very first page you worked on. So for instance, this redraw, I first drew the original version way back in 2012. And then I think I redid this in 2016, 2017? And that was when I believe the comic was finishing up. Sovereign is a finished comic. It was our first comic. We planned for it to be really, really long, and then we shortened it down quite a bit because we were like, we don't want to spend our whole life on this one comic. So we're gonna shorten it, finish it, and work on things we're more interested in. Luckily for my first page, it is very close to how the artwork ends at the end of the comic. So I have a little bit of a buffer, which does entice people. Anyways, let's get into the specifics of this page. What is working? I think from a flow perspective, meaning how someone will read through the page, I think it works pretty well. The flow, because you start up here with the first piece of text, then you go to the next piece of text. We have a nice little through line where we look at Zoltar. The flow of his coat and his pose kind of brings you around. That brings you down to the next speech bubble, and then to the next, and then to this final little thing of his face, and the finger under his chin kind of points you off to the next page. So I think the flow works very well. Again, I have the advantage of having reworked this page many years later. So the flow is a lot better. I think another great thing about this is that I think what helps make it work as the first page is that It starts out with some narration from our man Zoltar, and it brings up some questions where he's talking about how amazing he is. He's talking about a dark kingdom. He's talking about how it's boring. There's 12 other kingdoms. And there's a little bit of humor to it. We're getting a good taste of kind of what the comic will be, because Sovereign is like a fantasy adventure, lots of comedy in it, pretty lighthearted. So we start with a bit of a joke where it ends with our guy doing a little cheeky smile. And it's very cute. It's very fun. There's lots of energy from like the pose of Zoltar, where I think it does a good job of just saying like, this is kind of the energy you can expect. Overall, not my worst first page, but that is because it was redone years later. So it is a lot better. I would give it like a 6 out of 10. It does the job, you know, but it's not amazing. So let's move on. This is the first page of Pretty Mouth. So this was our second comic. It is a horror comic. It's a BL comic. Pretty Mouth has a lot of problems. In fact, it is a comic that Bones, the writer, hates so much. No one hates Pretty Mouth more than Bones hates Pretty Mouth. So this was our first comic, I want to say after Sovereign, but I was working on Pretty Mouth and Sovereign at the same time. But Sovereign was the first comic, Pretty Mouth was the second. And I think we finished Pretty Mouth before we finished Sovereign, because Pretty Mouth was supposed to be like a short comic. We wanted to get out something quickly after working on like a long form comic for a really long time. So it was originally a black and white comic. We have since, again, because of losing our sites, we went and colorized them and reposted them to some sites to get more readership, kind of rejuvenate things. So now it's in color. So again, it has a little bit of an advantage from when we first posted it when it was black and white. That's something to know. Color will get you more attention, typically, with your comic on your first page than a black and white comic. Color is just eye-catching. That's my biggest theory to it. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages for making a color comic. For one, coloring takes a lot longer to do, and if you have intentions to print your comic, printing in color is a lot more expensive. That is another disadvantage of color. However, it is very eye-catching. It brings a lot of people in. Color comics get more attention, truth be told. So that's something to consider. And with your first page, you could also consider just making the first page, the first couple pages colored, and then switching to grayscale or black and white. Alright, so what's working about this first page? I'd say it has a pretty good setup for mood. It has some solid storytelling going on in it. Everything is very like dark and moody. There's shadows everywhere. We have our girly Silver, who is checking her phone. She's waiting at a bus stop. The bus stop must be late because she's so frustrated. She's pacing back and forth. And behind her, we see a focus of like these dark shadows between the trees. So it is setting up that like something spooky is gonna happen. This isn't a very like bright and fun setting. So I think as a first page, it brings up some questions, which is important for bringing your reader in. You know, if you, on the first page or the first few pages, if you can have your reader wondering what's going to happen next. What is this story about? Who are these characters? That will pull them further in. And you can do that through world building aspects, through storytelling aspects, through visuals, all through the first page. There's no kind of like right way to have your first page. There's just things to consider and apply them to your own story, because every story is unique. But you want your first page to grab readers and bring them to the next page. I've even heard some people say that like your first page is like a microcosm of your whole comic. That can be a lot to put on a first page, where maybe your first scene needs to be like a very good setup for your comic. But I think that is something to consider when working on your first page. You are setting up for everything. Everything to come. You're setting up expectations of genre, of character, of atmosphere, all of it. If there was anything I could change about this page, what would it be? I honestly find these two panels a little repetitive. They are intentionally a little repetitive because it is Silver checking the time and then being upset about it. There hasn't been a big change in time. There hasn't been a big time skip between these two panels. So I understand like why I chose to make them so similar. What's a little frustrating is that they're similar but not entirely the same. I changed the camera angle, so in the second panel, we're looking up at her, and then in the next panel, we're kind of more to the side of her, and we've changed the angle a little bit. If I were to redo this, like I did the first Sovereign page, I think I would probably change these two panels so that there's either a larger event change in the second panel, or I would change it so that they're very similar and we are only seeing a small change in the character, where maybe we go from this angle to then the same, but she's like putting her phone in her pocket or dropping it by her side or whatever. Also, I will say the first panel works pretty well. There's a lot of focus on Silver, especially in color because of her red hair really popping out against this like blue-green background. But I think it works well to just like put her in the center. We understand who this character is. We have a good establishment of the setting and the vibes. And then for the last panel, I would probably make the trees more spooky, if anything. The composition is a little halved. We kind of have one half of the trees and one half of Silver. So she could be moved into the center a little bit more. And I think I would have put more kind of creepy details into the background. There's a little bit of shadow that I put in right here, which is a little too far off. I probably would put it here to be more on a focal point if I were to change it. But honestly, pretty passable first page. Now let's move on. Our next comic is The Magpie. So The Magpie we started after Sovereign and Pretty Mouth, though The Magpie is a prequel to Pretty Mouth. It's like connected, same universe, the characters are connected, but you can read them on their own as well. Magpie went through the same treatment where it originally came out in black and white, and we have since gone back and are doing recolors and reposting. So this is the new colored page. For a first page, I think there is some intrigue. It's an interesting setting. So to explain what's going on, we have Dennis, who is a child, despite the fact that I drew him as a tiny man, who is surrounded by monster dad. So in Pretty Mouth, one of the characters, his dad is this monster. So he's this big mass of goo. And so we have this kid who's surrounded in this forest by this creepy monster goo, and he has a child he has abducted and feeds it to the monster, which is an intriguing beginning. You're like, what? Why is there a monster? Is it normal for there to be monsters in this place? Who's this kid? Why is he feeding another kid to a monster? There's a lot of intrigue being set up for the world, for the story. He doesn't look happy about what he's doing. There's a lot of questions being brought up, and I think that's a nice way to start a comic, where people are full of questions. This especially works because Magpie is a bit of like a mystery thriller, so we're starting with some big questions. Whereas like if we were doing something more quiet, slice of life, cozy, we might just be setting up the vibe of it being like cozy and nice and comforting. Whereas this is like questions, questions, questions. Now, the issues I have with this for a first page is mostly clarity from my drawings. I think it's a little hard to tell what's going on. I think the first panel works pretty well. There's a lot of leading lines that bring you into the characters. There's some details where it looks like the kid is fighting from Dennis. That works really well. I think it's a good setup. But I find the two panels down here, this one doesn't work so well. There's not much happening. He's just looking around. It's not adding too much. I honestly would have made this smaller, because I think it's just him hesitating, if I'm remembering correctly. I think I would have made this a little smaller, maybe a bit more focus on his expression, and I would have made this last panel a lot bigger, because this is like the important part, where the monster is taking this other kid that he's brought. And I would have liked to make it more clear that he has like pushed the kid in, even though he's conflicted. So that is That's honestly a lot to change. But that is what I would change, and I would change it just because of clarity, where it would still be bringing up these questions of like, who is this kid? What is this monster? What are they doing? Why are they sacrificing a child? But it would be much more clear about what is going on. So make sure that in your first page, it is clear what's happening. Make sure that it is easy to understand. Really focus on the action or whatever you're trying to get across in your panels and make it clear. So that if people are getting questions and being curious, they know, I guess you have more control over what they're wondering about, and they're not wondering random things because they don't understand what's happening. Now we have The Scourge of 9 Point, and this is probably our best comic. It's our passion project. The Scourge of 9 Point is going to be a very long-running comic. We did a lot of world building for it. I do a lot of design work for it. We started it a lot later. I learned a lot from working on Pretty Mouth, the Magpie, Sovereign, and I really, when I was working on 9 Point for the first time, I really wanted this to be like my best work at the time. So I worked really hard on making this first page really, really nice. And I think it does a really good job with that. I did a lot. And I think what makes it work is that we start off with a nice establishing shot. We're asking questions because we're like, okay, from the dialogue and from the setup of like a taller cat standing in front of all these little cats, it seems like it's a teacher. There's like a class going on, but like the setting's interesting because we've got this like fountain, we've got this balcony, their clothing is interesting, it feels very like fantasy. So I think this does a good job of like bringing in questions and answers about the setting, setting up that it's like an anthro comic. And from the dialogue, we're like, calicos? Kill? What? We're bringing in some interesting questions where it's like, why is a teacher telling these kittens to do calico murders? That's heckin' weird. So I think it brings up some interesting questions, even though the setting is a little bit cheery, It's an interesting juxtaposition. So then from there we do a close-up on Mitzi, who is one of our main characters, who's like a little eager beaver to answer the questions in the class, and the teacher calls on her. And then from there we go into a bit of a world building lesson that's dressed up as like a student talking about things and teachers giving lectures and stuff. But it's all just kind of to set up the world in a little character-driven way. Now, I think this first page works because it begins setting up our world really quickly. From the jump, we know that we're talking about calicos, we're talking about cats hunting down calicos, because in The Scourge of 9 Point, our other main character, Marble, who shows up in a later scene, is a calico cat who is being hunted down by the Knights of 9 Point. And that's the main point of the story. So right from the jump, we're setting up calicos are oppressed. They're being hunted down. What the heck is going on here? And we're also setting up the knights. We're setting up Mitzi, who is, at the moment, she's like a student, but she will eventually become a knight at some point. We're setting up the 9 Point Empire, which Mitzi is a part of. And even though we're not sitting down and spelling it all out, we're not doing like a big info dump about like, here's the whole world. Oh, she's from the 9 Point Empire. Oh, they're hunting down calicos for hundreds of years. The knights are oppressing the wildlanders. Wildlanders are non-cats and blah, blah, blah. Like, instead of going into all of it, we're just starting out with like one interesting question, which is, what's the deal with the calicos? And as for the quality of the page, I'm honestly really happy with it. There's some little wibbly perspective stuff where, like, I was still learning a little bit about painting. I notice it right here specifically. I was still learning a lot about painting. I was still learning a lot about, like, perspective, but it's serviceable. It does the job. I think it does a good job of, like, making the setting stand out, the character expression, the composition really works, where we're kind of slowly bringing the camera in and down, and then we focus on Mitzi because we brought the camera down here, and then we do a little flip reverse where we still see her hand. It's easy to follow, flow-wise, continuity-wise. I think this is a solid first page. So, you know, your first page doesn't have to be the most fascinating thing ever, but it should be setting things up. It should be easy to read. all that good stuff. For our last first page, that's funny, last first page, is for our most recent comic, The Books of Avo, which is a comic version of a novel. So it's a little bit different than our other comic pages. We also originally created it to be in vertical webtoon format, where our other comics were all built to be like book first, comic pages rather than like a scrolling version. The composition is a little different for those, where here the intent is just to get people scrolling down to learn more kind of thing, right? But I think this is a pretty strong start enticing-wise, with enticing questions, where it starts out very dark. This is the prologue to the story, and it's a very simple page, admittedly, but that can really work for you sometimes. I think that because there's a real focus on just the words, and then a really small, shocking visual at the bottom, I think it shows that, for one, the story has teeth. There will be bad things happening to people and characters. It also sets up the fantasy setting through the words, because we mentioned an ancient library bathed in blood. It's like there's got to be some real bad things happening. Some big fantasy things for this ancient library to be desecrated like this. And I think this is really simple, where we are just focusing on the words. We're just focusing on the impact of what's happened, that I think, again, just brings up questions, but it keeps it simple. So we're wondering about, who is this character? What has he just stumbled upon? Ooh, an ancient library. What's that all about? Why is it bathed in blood? What has happened here? It brings up a lot of questions, and it will get people scrolling. So you can start really, really simple, and I think it can still be effective as a first page. You can start with setting, you can start with emotion, you can start with mystery setups, you can start with world building. There's so many different ways to start your first page. Like I said earlier, there's no real right answer. You do what works for your story. One word of warning though, when we first posted this on Webtoon, we got flagged for all of the blood. In fact, I have this black and white just so that YouTube doesn't get mad. So when you are starting your comic, even if you're working on like a horror comic or a really fighty comic or something, just be careful what you show. It's not always welcome on a lot of platforms, so just be wary of that with your first page. So that's it. Those are the first pages of my comics. Some successes, some failures. Hopefully you will learn from my mistakes and do better, and I wish you all luck on your comics. Try your best out there. You got this. If you are a comic creator looking to hang out with more artists and writers and people who care about comics, I would recommend joining our Discord. There should be a link down below. Check it out, meet people, talk about comics, have a good time, and also make sure to like the video. That would help us out a lot. That's it. Goodbye!